Welcome to today's webinar. We are talking today about the how to integrate process monitoring system into your medical device production. The webinar today is held by myself, Stephan Vogel, and by my colleague Martin Lack. And we will explain to you a little bit how to integrate process monitoring system in the production and the specialities that is coming out of the medical device industry. So Martin, could you please share the presentation?
It's already shared, isn't it?
Okay. So maybe I have a technical issue. I cannot see it. Give me a second, please. Now I see it. Okay. And could you hand me over the control, please, and I can start? Okay. So this should work now. So first of all, we will have a very quick introduction about the company Kistler and what we are doing in the medical device industry. This is done by myself, then followed up by the process monitoring system Maximus, which is helped by my colleague Martin. And after that, we will talk about an important topic once you've installed sensors and process monitoring systems in your production, how to calibrate and recalibrate it. So first of all, let's talk quickly about the company Kistler. The company Kistler is a global company with more than 2,000 people working. We have more than 60 locations worldwide. We are partnering with more than 30 universities and colleges and R&D partners. That results in more than 700 worldwide patents that we are granted. And last but not least, we're serving more than 10,000 active customers per year. This is both in sales and service with our products, and we are coming now a little bit deeper into what we are serving. So here you can see a very rudimentary picture of how a product is coming to life. On the left side, you see an idea and a development and industrialization phase. So all of our sensors and systems can be used to develop products and to industrialize the production, okay? And typically production is separated into different steps. So we have primary forming, which is producing single parts, plastic parts, metal parts, stamped parts. And Kistler is offering here quite a substantial product program, for example, for injection molding processes to control and monitor them, but as well in the stamping and the cutting business. We do have optical camera systems and complete test stands for especially high-speed stamp parts, for example, in the vision inspection area. And for the assembly part, when you put all these single components together, we are offering typically sensors in the range of force, torque, pressure, acceleration, and the adequate monitoring system with that, up to complete autonomous joining systems. So linear drives that are joining two components, and is all force and displacement monitored. Today's webinar is dealing basically on the assembly part, which is can be manual, semi-automatic, or automatic. And we are talking today about this, but please feel free to contact us anytime if you have questions for the other parts, which is then taken care of by our colleagues. Just some quick words about the advantages of piezoelectric sensors. So the Kistler is a piezoelectric company. These sensors that can be used for force, torque, pressure measurement, and so on, they have some huge advantages compared to other technologies on the market, and especially when it comes for high speed and high dynamic production, since these sensors are very stiff and very short, so they can be installed in almost any machine. They are very small and they're very stiff, so they are almost wear-free. So you can use them for very high speed applications and very high dynamic applications. And due to the specific piezo effect that we are using, you can use them as well in a wide range. So you can use the same sensor measuring small newtons up to some kilonewtons. That means it's really versatile, and you can use it for both the development, where you measure, for example, some tolerance ranges, very high ranges, and for production, you can use the same sensor to measure an average torque, force or torque. And plus, they are not active in the sense that they have an active electronic, so they have a very good EMC immunity. Due to the high stiffness, we have as well a very high resolution with our sensor technology. They are very reliable, almost maintenance-free. The only thing you maybe need to do due to your quality management system is a recalibration. We are coming to that later. So therefore, we have a very long service lifetime. It's very easy to integrate them, and they are very rugged. They can be used in harsh environments as well as in clean room environments. So that's just a little bit about the sensors. If you want to know more about that, please feel free to contact us. What we want to talk about is, why should you integrate sensors in your medical production or in any production? Well, for medical, we have here some good examples from the FDA, for example, that when it comes for process validation rules. So the 21 CRF 820.75 says, where the result of a process cannot be fully verified by subsequent inspection and test, the process shall be validated with a high degree of assurance. So that means once you integrate sensors into your production process that monitor this process, you do have 100% inspection of each quality relevant process step. That means you are saving a lot of time for validation processes. Of course, you need to qualify everything. You need to do qualification, but you can save a lot of time and efforts in the validation of your whole production process. And with these processes, you are following as well the regulations of the GHTF, it's the old name, which is then saying you need to do a qualification, a so-called operational qualification or an OQ. That means that you are measuring as well the process limits, so the minus or the negative and positive process limits, and you need to be able to run them. So again, our sensors and systems are very solid and very rugged, so you can use that for testing it on the really tolerance ranges, but as well use the same for your standard ranges. And then you need to do a performance qualification, the so-called PQ. So that says that you need that you have objective evidence that your process is under anticipated condition very consistently produces a high good quality according to the requirements. So that means the more you measure directly during the process, the better you can prove evidence. And last but not least, for the validation itself, it says that the process needs to produce consistent results according to the requirements. And again, if you do 100% inspection of your quality relevant parameters, this is already a proof. So this is the major reasons out of the norms and regulations and whatever. This is not only by the FDA, by the way, this is as well on a global perspective, because MDR, the European regulation, is saying almost the same. This is coming out of quality management and is not, let's say, a local rule or something like this. So now I hand over to Martin, who is now telling you how to integrate such a process monitoring system and what you need when it comes from medical regulation.
Hello, everybody. Also, a warm welcome from my side. And it's a pleasure for me to go through the presentation with you. And just further information, we do a recording of this webinar. So later on, you will be able to see also the recorded presentation for your own purposes. So what we are talking about, if you're talking about Maximus TLML, we are talking about a device which is designed for the production monitoring. So you can do in 3 levels production monitoring. You can do it either inline, end of line, or at least offline. So for the device itself, you need devices. This is the measuring module where you do all the calculation, all the comparison between the measured values. You can have a display, cabling, and you need a displacement sensor, or you can do it also over time, but we recommend the displacement sensor, and you can measure force or torque for your system. So how does it work, the device? So for example, you have a system where you want to implement in a placeholder a device. You press something into another case with force, and you measure the displacement. Over the displacement, we can show on our device the force curve, and we implement in this device kind of windows, evaluation objects called, and these windows you can define if you want to go inside from the bottom, out on the right side or at the top or whatever. You can go through another window and then go out of the last window of that. As long as the force curve over the displacement runs through these predefined windows, everything is fine and it's showed as green and everything is okay. If you do the same thing with the force and the displacement, and there's something inside your device which you want to bring together, then you see that the displacement is not possible to go to the end which is expected. But the force is still increasing, so the device stops and shows everything red because the force curve is not running through the predefined windows. And with this definition, force over displacement or force over time, you can do a very good evaluation of your process. And the Maximus TLML shows directly if the process is okay, green, or not okay, red. So if you think with this evaluation in your process, the device itself is able to measure values direct in your process and give a direct feedback if the process is okay or not okay. In addition, all the information is now able to be transferred to an upper layer system or for further documentation or for further requirements. With the Maximus TLML, we can support OPC UA, Profinet, EtherCAT, Ethernet IP, or TCP IP at least. So the main field bus systems are able to be supported by the Maximus TLML. But the main important benefit of the Maximus TLML is at least that you can switch over during your process from one batch to another batch. Because immediately, if the device, the Maximus TLML, is activated with the new parameters for the new batch which you want to produce, the definition starts immediately with the good or not so good parts in this case. So you can switch over from one batch to another batch without another quality assessment. So how does it work, the Maximus TLML? Related to safety or security issues, we are able to switch off all kind of ports in the Maximus TLML and open just those ports which you need for your documentation or communication to the device. All other ports can be locked or unlocked by a user management, and only the user who has the rights to open these ports can open or close these ports. And now we are on the user management. So we can define users which can get rights in the Maximus TLML to do certain things, to define evaluation objects, as I mentioned before, the windows, or activate, deactivate ports, activate, deactivate field bus systems, do settings, do pre-settings, and so on. And this can be done by predefined users which get the rights for doing that. Why is it necessary something like a user management to have? I come to this later, but also the Maximus TLML is able to do a lightweight directory protocol. So it's called LDAP. So with this protocol, it is easy to give the rights to the users on the Maximus TLML by a higher level system. So for example, if a user batches into the whole machine via the upper layer system, automatically all the rights which are predefined on the Maximus are available and the user can work directly on this device. And this is necessary for the audit trail at least. So in the audit trail which is implemented in the Maximus device itself, here we log all information, who changed what, when, and why. And on the device itself, it's also possible that all changes which are stored on the device can be filtered by different parameters. For example, you can filter for who or what or which parameter or what was the reason. Also, this data can be exported to an external server where you can do further investigation for this log files, which is called audit trail in our situation. Additionally, for documentation, sometimes it is required that the documents are directly available on paper base. So you can activate a printer in the Maximus TLML, and the communication goes via TCP/IP directly to a printer. And then you can decide either after each cycle of measuring, each cycle of process, that documentation is printed out by paper, or you can activate it manual if you have, for example, a manual process which you want to control with our Maximus device. So when the documentation can look like, as you see on the right corner, this is, for example, a documentation of the NO key. You see the curve itself, how the force displacement was, and you can get all parameters settings for this NOK parameters or for the OK parameters here. So now I will give you a little bit of preview for what's coming up. So we will implement in our Maximus TLML device in the future AAC function. This is called active acceleration compensation. And here we will compensate the influence on the force which comes through dynamic or comes through acceleration. If you keep in mind, for example, the green curve is the force which our force sensor, or doesn't matter if it's a force sensor from Kistler, but we prefer the sensors from Kistler. You see the force, and also in this force you see is the acceleration of a spindle or a linear motion. It's included here. But this is not the real force which we attach to the processes which we are working on there. The real force is the red line, and the red line is the reduced force which is coming from the acceleration, which you can see in the blue curve. So this will be a function which will be there in the future with our next software release in summer 2022. Additional for this release, we implemented a sensitivity correction. So the sensitivity correction is a function where you can compensate the influence which comes from the mounting in your machine or the influence which comes from different force ranges which you need in your machine. And you can do this by up to 31 support points. You can precisely define the real force which you can compare with a force sensor during the calibration, the in situ calibration inside your machine. So the benefits out of this, what I mentioned to you, to use Maximus TLML, the Maximus TLML was specifically created to fulfill the requirements which are announced in the FDA and MDR regulations related to GAMP 5. So the measuring range is designed in this Maximus TLML, especially for application in medical area. In addition, as I mentioned, we have audit trail functionality inside the Maximus TLML, which is available at each time on the device via the service functionality, and you can see who changed what, when, and why. We have implemented user management so that only allowed and certified people can attend to the Maximus settings and do changes on the Maximus devices. And all these changes are automatically logged in our audit trail functionality. The Maximus TLML can be very secure because of the switchable interface ports. So you can close or open ports which you need for your own purpose on your machine. And in addition, it's IoT proof with an integrated OPC UA communication, directly communication to the upper layer systems. In a nutshell, Maximus TLML device is FDA and MDR compatible. We ensure 100% inline process monitoring, and we reduces the efforts for qualification and validation massively by the functions and features which are integrated in the Maximus TLML device. So for that, I'll hand over back to Stephan Vogel, and he will go with you through the in situ calibration now. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin. So now we are coming to the topic, what happens when you have installed or when you decide for having sensors and evaluation units or monitoring systems inside of your production. So here as well, FDA and other norms, especially quality management norms, they give you a hint that everything that measures a quality relevant parameter needs to be checked by time if it's still working properly. This is called the so-called calibration. With the calibration, you are counter-checking your measurement sensor, your sensor, to a traceable or non-traceable standard. And it is quite obvious that typically all the calibration needs to be traceable to an international or national standard. That means you go way back to the original basic value of that measurement. But of course, not always is it possible to have it traceable. It's because sometimes it's just not practical. So that means, and all the norms give and the quality management systems, they give a rule that if it's not practical or available, then you can use an independent reproducible standard. Here, the most important thing is reproducible. And you can even establish that as an in-house standard. That means in a very nutshell, for production equipment, an own calibration process can be implemented, but it's always very important, if you do so, that you stay as close as possible to some aspects of the ISO 17025. But why not doing a traceable calibration for everything? Well, a traceable calibration is typically done in a laboratory. So that means you have to take the sensors out of your system, out of your production, send it into a certified laboratory that is then back traceable to a national standard. And there you can do that calibration. The downturn, of course, is that you have to take out the sensors and you have to build them back in once the calibration is done. So maybe that takes some days, weeks until the sensor is back. Plus you're changing your machine and therefore the process, the manufacturing process. So in the worst case, it could happen that you have to do a complete process validation again. But there is, of course, a possibility when creating an own standard or using an in-house standard that you leave the sensors inside of the machine and calibrate it there. So what is the background of this? So when you calibrate according to ISO 17025, this is, of course, the most safe and reliable calibration. And it's typically the verification with the highest reliability. If there is a lawsuit, of course, if it's traceable calibrated, then it gives more weight to it. And it is valid international, since there is an international agreement, the so-called MRA agreement, that says everything works, every traceable certificate, every certified laboratory is working to the same standards. And this is, of course, ideal if you have reference sensors that you use to calibrate your working standards, your sensors in the line. On the other hand, there is so-called test certificates or ISO calibrations. So you can have a metrological traceability without special requirements to the test equipment. And these test certificates or ISO calibrations typically fulfill most or always the requirements of most of the quality management system. Doesn't matter if you use ISO 9001 or the 13485, which is typically common in medical. They all say, yes, you can do that for your production equipment. Of course, then the standard you are using to calibrate your production equipment needs to be traceable calibrated. So you have your norm and you send that back to the laboratory, and then you are trace it back to your production equipment. So this is very important, and it gives us the possibility then to have a so-called in situ calibration. And there is another very big advantage to do the calibration on site, on the machine. Typically, you have to do a measurement uncertainty calculation of the calibration process and of your sensors. So how certain is your calibration, or is your measurement process? Typically, you're comparing your input quantity, an input value, for example, a force, that you're pressing to the sensor with the signal the sensor is giving out. And therefore, you are using a calibration process. So everything that adds on to the process gives an additional uncertainty. The sensors themselves have an uncertainty. The amplifiers for the sensor signal have an uncertainty. And of course, you have the mechanics that add an uncertainty too. So here on the right-hand picture, you see a spindle, a joining system, a linear actuator. And on the bottom in blue, there is the sensor with our Maximus. And this spindle is put on a C-frame. So when pressing down, of course, this C-frame moves a very, very little bit, but this adds uncertainty to your measurement value. So if you calibrate this sensor then installed in the machine, of course, you're taking all these aspects that are coming out of the installation into consideration as well. So all the production tolerances and so on. You just have to make clear that the reference sensor you're putting in, right, is positioned always the same time and therefore you then can create a reproducible calibration standard. So in total, you can say all the measurement uncertainty of your overall system can be massively improved when you do the in situ calibration. You can do it as well, each component by itself, but then you have to add an uncertainty safety to all of the single components, and by calculating them together, by adding them, you reach a way higher uncertainty, calculated one, as it is in the real life. So therefore, it's good to calibrate it all together. When calibrating, you have to see that there are different ways, possibilities to do so. Typically, what you do is when you create an own process, you are describing the calibration process you are using, the measurement points you're using, and you are defining what has to be calibrated, in which on which load points, for example, and so on. I'm sorry, it's too quick. There we go. And then, of course, there is some rules regarding the calibration sheet or test certificate sheet that you create. By the ISO 17025 has an own part where there's a whole description what needs to be part of a calibration sheet. This is, of course, that you have the sensors identified and the equipment identified by a serial number, for example, but it has as well included, for example, the uncertainty for each calibration point, for each measurement point. Then you can decide if you do stepwise calibration, continuous calibration. So there is pros and cons for everything. All the quality management systems, they state that a calibration needs to be done by qualified people. And Kistler is very happy that we can support you with the calibration service, which is not only including the calibration itself, but as well a recommendation or a discussion, what is possible, what can we do, and which uncertainties we can reach with this calibration. So we are offering a complete service from the beginning, from the start of it, to the process creation until the calibration and recalibrations that have to be typically done periodically. There is, of course, some critical points you have to think of when you do inline calibration. So first of all, it is about the equipment that is there, about the production machine itself. So for example, is the load machine able to hold the forces long enough? Because typically a calibration needs to be at 20-30 seconds at the same point with the same force, that it's able to, the signal is then getting quiet and you can then get the best signal out of it. And then in addition, your load machine needs to be able to hold the force of the upper and lower tolerance thresholds as well, because typically you are calibrating a little bit over your standard points, or at least at the tolerance points you define in your OQ. Then, of course, the whole machine, the production machine needs to be able to run at the certain calibration points. So maybe the PLC has a certain program for doing calibration. If not, it is necessary that you can, for example, hand move it to the position. And last but not least, there must be enough space to fit a reference sensor, maybe including an adapter, to the machine underneath the sensor. And last but not least, this is now more to the data part. This calibration process and the values you get out of it needs to be, your quality management system needs to allow it. So this is then up to you, up to your quality management system, up to your measurement principles and management systems. But if these points are fulfilled, there is nothing, speaks nothing against an inline calibration with all its advantages. So just as a takeaway, the in situ calibration, you can use it for your production equipment, and it can be implemented together with the calibration process. The most important thing is to stay as close as possible to some parts of the ISO 17025 to be as much compatible as possible. This will help you to get any certification or any approval by an auditor. Most important point in saving time and money is that an expensive disassembling and reassembling of the whole measurement chain is not necessary anymore. And therefore, a possible revalidation of a process can be avoided. And the measurement uncertainty and production tolerances can be improved with the in situ calibration. Thank you very much for attending this. It was a lot of information in a very short time. We know that. If you got any question, please feel free to put it into chat. We will answer that later via email, via direct notice. And please notice as well for all the guests in the US that we will be attending the MD&M Minneapolis in November. So we have an own booth there, and you can talk to our experts there, or you use our private, our company email address listed here to contact us for any further question. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon for one of our next webinars. You can find them on the Kistler webpage. Thank you very much.